Happy Halloween! You know those horror movies you love? They started as police reports.
From the Gainesville Ripper, inspiring Scream, to the real Hannibal Lecter, these scripts were written in blood before they ever hit the screen.
Did you know Scream is inspired by a real-life serial killer? The killer, dubbed the Gainesville Ripper, stalked young college kids at the University of Florida. He savagely tortured, raped, and murdered his victims before posing their bodies for police to find. He was meticulous, as if he'd seen a few too many scary movies himself. He knew what police would be looking for and made every effort to throw them off his trail. For 72 harrowing hours, Danny Rowling terrorized the college town of Gainesville, Florida. Danny murdered 5 innocent students as they slept in their off-campus apartments. He mutilated their bodies before slipping into the night, knowing the police would never catch him. And they never did, at least not for the murders. Instead, Danny's ego got the best of him in the end. Danny arrived in Gainesville in August 1990, just as the fall semester at the University of Florida was about to begin. He made camp in the woods outside of town, where he sat and played guitar and recorded several audio tapes full of songs and mindless ramblings. And one of those tapes ends with Danny saying, "I'm going to sign off for a little bit. I've got something I've got to do." On Friday, August 24th, 2 freshmen at the University of Florida, Sonia Larson and Christina Powell, were asleep in their apartment. It was the early morning hours, the time between 2 and 4 a.m. when nothing good happens. Danny broke in, armed with a Marine Corps K-bar knife and an automatic pistol, and found Christina asleep on the living room couch. He stood over her for a moment before exploring the rest of the apartment. He found Sonia asleep in an upstairs bedroom and used duct tape to keep her mouth shut and conceal her screams. Danny held Sonia's hands behind her head and stabbed her 20 times in the chest. Judging by the smear marks and defensive wounds, Sonia died fighting for her life. Danny dragged her to the foot of the bed before heading back downstairs. Christina slept through the ordeal, only waking to find a masked man pressing a double strip of duct tape against her mouth. He bound her arms and used the K-bar knife to cut off her clothes and underwear. He assaulted her violently, threatening her with the knife if she dared fight back. When he was done, he forced Christina to lie face down on the floor, where he stabbed her 5 times in the back. She bled to death while he helped himself to a shower. But before leaving, Danny posed the bodies in sexually explicit positions, a calling card that would eventually come back to bite him. He also severed Sonia's nipples and kept them as trophies. On Saturday night, he broke into the apartment of 18-year-old Krista Hoyt, using a screwdriver to pry open the sliding glass door. But Krista was out for the night and didn't return home until 11 a.m. That was fine. Danny had nowhere to be. He ambushed her from behind when she finally came home. He put her in a chokehold and duct taped her mouth and hands. Then he dragged her into the bedroom and cut off her clothes as he'd done with Christina Powell. After violating her, Danny flipped Krista over and stabbed her several times in the back. One wound ruptured her aorta and she bled to death in seconds. As with Sonia, he cut off Christina's nipples and placed them on the bed beside her body. But then he took his staged murder scene a step further. He decapitated Krista and placed her head on the bookshelf across from the bed, facing her. Then he propped up her body to sit at the foot of the bed. On Sunday morning, Christina's parents drove to Gainesville to check on their daughter. They hadn't heard from her since Friday. Strange for a freshman beginning the next stage of their life. According to the Chicago Tribune, the parents accompanied police officers to the building around 4 p.m. and a maintenance worker let them into the apartment. Inside, they discovered a grisly scene. The chief medical examiner knew right away this was the work of a Ted Bundy-style serial killer. Whoever they were, they knew what they were doing. You might say they were cold, cruel, and calculated. 9 hours later, the police got another call. Krista Hoyt never showed up for her evening shift at the county sheriff's department. They drove 2 miles from the first murder scene to find a 3rd mutilated body. News of the murders spread like wildfire. Students fled the area and many began sleeping in groups and carrying bats wherever they went. Some slept in shifts, like keeping watch on an active battlefield. But even with all the heightened attention, the Gainesville Ripper wasn't done. He still had more lives to take. Around 3 a.m. on Monday, August 27th, Danny broke into an apartment owned by lifelong friends and college roommates Manny Taboda and Tracy Paulus. Like Krista's apartment, Danny used his screwdriver to pry open the sliding glass door. He first crept into Manny's room and found him asleep in bed. But Manny was an athletic kid and put up a decent fight. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to save his life. Tracy heard the struggle and rushed to Manny's room. There she saw Danny with a knife held over his head. He was covered in Manny's blood, and he quickly turned his attention toward Tracy. She fled down the hallway and tried to lock herself in her bedroom, but the thin door was no match for Danny's large frame. He broke through it and bound Tracy with duct tape. Her final words before he taped her mouth were, "You're the one, aren't you?" Danny replied, "Yeah, I'm the one." The University of Florida canceled the first week of classes as police conducted their investigation. In their minds, they were dealing with a professional who knew exactly what the police would look for. Danny cleaned up nicely before leaving each crime scene. He removed the duct tape and threw the pieces in nearby dumpsters. He wore gloves the entire time, so fingerprints were out of the question. He even sanitized the bodies with chemicals to conceal any DNA and semen, but he didn't get all of it. Even though they collected 18,000 pieces of evidence, all police had to go on were the posed bodies, some scratch marks on the sliding glass doors, and some semen found on Christina Powell's underwear. News of the Gainesville killings made it back to Shreveport, Louisiana, where police had an eerily similar cold case on their hands from November 1989. 55-year-old William Grissom lived with his 24-year-old daughter, Julie. She was a petite brunette like the four girls in Gainesville, studying marketing at the Louisiana State University of Shreveport. William's 8-year-old grandson and Julie's nephew, Sean, was spending the weekend for his birthday. Sadly, he'd never celebrate another. William was cooking steaks that night while Julie had plans to attend a high school friend's wedding. Between 6 and 8 p.m., a psychopath broke into their home and stabbed all three of them to death. Police found William's body stuffed in a utility closet with multiple stab wounds to his back and chest. Sean was face down in the living room with a single stab wound through his back and chest. Finally, they found Julie in the bedroom naked and mutilated with obvious signs of sexual assault. Her attacker bound her mouth and wrists with duct tape and tried to clean her body with vinegar. It would take 17 years and 5 more grisly deaths before the Grissom triple murder case was finally officially solved. But we're not quite there just yet. You'll be hard-pressed to find a serial killer that doesn't come from some messed-up childhood, and Danny's story is no different. He was born in May 1954 to James and Claudia Rowling. The family lived in Shreveport, Louisiana, where James worked as a lieutenant with the police department. He was, by all accounts, a horrible father. James and Claudia married when she was 19, but he fell into a fit of rage when she got pregnant 2 weeks later. He never wanted children, and the world would have been a better place if he never did. Since he couldn't take out his rage on their unborn child, James focused on Claudia instead. He beat her until Danny was born, giving him a new target to abuse. James gave Danny a beating for his first birthday. Apparently, he didn't like how his toddler son crawled. For a guy who never wanted kids, James didn't seem to know where they came from. Danny's younger brother, Kevin, was born in 1955, and the abuse just got worse. By most accounts, he was cold, cruel, and calculated, perhaps the only traits that rubbed off on young Danny. At 11 years old, he found escape in music and began playing guitar and singing. Then he turned to booze and drugs. His life of crime seemed to kick off at age 14 when a neighbor caught him at his daughter's window. Danny caught a vicious beating for the Peeping Tom incident and ran off to join the military as soon as he was legal a few years later. But the Navy rejected him, and his time in the Air Force didn't last long. As the story goes, he was eventually forced out. So he tried to make a go of it as a family man. He married a woman named Omather Loomis in 1974, but they were divorced by 77. 1 year into their marriage, he started disappearing at night. He was up to his old tricks, peeping into neighbor ladies' windows. After he threatened her at gunpoint, his wife took their baby girl and left. In retaliation, he raped a woman that looked a lot like O'Mather and spent the next 13 years in and out of prison for a series of armed robberies. But he was capable of much worse. In May of 1990, an argument broke out in the Rowling household. Danny, now standing at 6'2" and clocking in at over 200 pounds, could easily overpower his father. Yet the man still made him feel small. So Danny grabbed a gun and shot his father in the face and stomach, bringing him within an inch of his life. Miraculously, James survived, though he lost the use of one eye and an ear. Now, wanted for attempted murder, Danny fled south to Sarasota, Florida. He changed his name to Michael Kennedy Jr., but he didn't change his ways. The first thing he did was break into the home of Janet Frake through a back bedroom window. He wore a black ski mask while he assaulted her repeatedly and threatened to leave her for dead in the closet. But Janet kept calm, at least as calm as she could. Instead of screaming and fighting, she treated Danny like a friend. She even handed him a beer and a cold glass, hoping he'd leave behind some DNA evidence. After hours, she managed to convince him to leave and spare her life. Danny headed 3 hours north to Gainesville. 3 weeks later, all hell broke loose. At first, the Gainesville cops suspected 19-year-old college student Edward Humphrey. He'd recently been evicted from Manny and Tracy's apartment complex and was known to make bizarre and scary comments around campus. According to the New York Times, police arrested Edward after he allegedly assaulted his grandmother, though she denies anything ever happened. While Danny camped out in the woods for the next 2 months, playing guitar and singing songs, police publicly identified Edward as the prime suspect in the Gainesville slayings. They plastered his picture in every newspaper and set his bail at $1 million, but they never found any evidence against him. Sure, Edward was an odd kid. He made the perfect scapegoat for the brutal killings, but he wasn't the Gainesville Ripper. Less than a month after the murders, forensics confirmed the DNA found at all 3 scenes was from the same man, but it wasn't Edward Humphrey. But the public had calmed down by then, thinking the Gainesville Ripper was in police custody. So, to keep the peace, the cops kept this new discovery to themselves. Unfortunately, it left them back at square one. Funny enough, Florida police did already have the Gainesville Ripper in custody. They just didn't know it. If you remember, Danny wasn't just a killer, he was also a thief. 10 days after police found Manny and Tracy's bodies, he got arrested for robbing a supermarket in Ocala, about 40 minutes south of Gainesville. On the night of Krista Hoyt's murder, police responded to a bank robbery about a mile from her home. The teller said they slipped a red dye pack into the money bag before handing it to the robber. Later that night, an officer noticed a suspicious man walking in the woods. He gave chase, but lost the man in the trees. He tracked the man to a campsite where he found a bag of cash covered in red dye. He also found a screwdriver, a gun, and a cassette player with a tape inside. At the time, they didn't link the robbery to the murders. If only they'd listened to that tape. The Gainesville Ripper case was on the verge of going cold when a woman from Louisiana called in with a groundbreaking tip. Cindy Jurasich had grown up with Danny in Shreveport. They went to the same church, and he regularly hung out with her and her husband Steve. In late August 1990, Cindy was driving across the Florida Panhandle when she heard the news about the Gainesville murders. It made her recall something Danny had said before leaving town. He said, "One day I'm going to leave this town and I'm going to go where the girls are beautiful and I can just lay in the sun and watch beautiful women all day." If that's your goal, Gainesville is the place. He had also told her husband Steve that he liked to stick knives in people, which was the last straw. Danny wasn't welcome in their home anymore, and he skipped town shortly after. Cindy thought about it for a few months, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that her old acquaintance could have made his way to Gainesville. In November 1990, she suggested they look into Danny Rowling. That's when they went down to the Marion County Jail and tested his blood. Sure enough, it was a match. Police rushed back to Gainesville and examined the campsite evidence. They finally listened to the tape recorder, which included recordings of Danny singing and talking to himself. In one song, he sang, "Mystery Rider, what's your name? You're a killer, a drifter gone insane." Finally, the man on the tape admitted to being Danny Rowling, and the final puzzle piece fell into place. They charged him with murdering the 5 college students and convicted him of bank robbery before the murder trial began. He was transferred to Florida State Prison, where he befriended Bobby Lewis, a death row inmate serving a life sentence for killing a drug dealer. For some reason, Danny told Bobby everything about the murders. He wanted to make an official confession. In doing so, investigators learned even more disgusting details about the murders. Apparently, Danny left after killing Krista Hoyt, but was worried he left his wallet behind at the crime scene. He returned several hours later to look for it, and that's when he decided to cut off her head and pose it on the bookshelf. Danny also dove into his multiple personalities. One was Yinad, or Danny spelled backward. He said Yinad was bad, but wasn't evil, not like Gemini. Danny's second, more sinister alter ego, Gemini killed those kids, not me. He pled guilty to all charges before his trial began in February 1994. The jury sentenced him to death on April 20th, 1994. Danny sat on death row for 12 years, and just before he was put to death, he wrote a letter confessing the 1989 Grissom family murders. In that time, he got engaged to controversial true crime author Sandra London and sat down for several interviews regarding his case. In March 1994, an episode of ABC's Turning Point covered the Gainesville Ripper case. The story inspired Kevin Williamson to write Scream, which he originally called Scary Movie, before selling it to Miramax. On October 25, 2006, a Florida state prison executed Danny by lethal injection. His last meal consisted of lobster tail and butterfly shrimp with strawberry cheesecake and sweet tea for dessert. 47 people packed into the viewing room, more than double its capacity, to watch Danny die. The prison doctor pronounced him dead a little after 6 p.m., finally ending the most gruesome crime spree in Gainesville history.
The real-life Hannibal the Cannibal is locked in a glass cage built just for him. For almost 50 years, Robert Maudsley has been kept away from other humans. He's been called the most dangerous prisoner in Britain, but he's never killed an innocent man. He made it his mission to kill off child abusers one by one. Since he was already in prison, the victims came to him. For his crimes, he now lives in a bulletproof cage that looks eerily similar to Hannibal Lecter's cell in The Silence of the Lambs, except Robert's was designed for him in 1983, years before the movie came out. And just like Anthony Hopkins' character in the movie, Robert has a genius-level IQ and loves the finer things in life, classical music, poetry, and art, but he'll never get to indulge his passions. He spends 23 hours a day alone in a see-through cell in the prison basement, furnished with a concrete slab for a bed and a cardboard table and chair. For the last 40 years, his only human contact are the prison guards that take him outside for his mandatory 1-hour yard time. And they thought his social skills were bad before. At the age of 21, he killed for the first time. John Farrell was a literal John. He picked Robert up for sex work and took him back to his place in North London. And while he was there, John pulled out some photos of children that he sexually abused. Who knows what kind of reaction he thought he'd get, but he definitely didn't expect what happened. At the sight of the sick pictures, Robert flew into a rage and garroted the man to death, twisting it so tight around his neck, he turned blue. He turned himself in and was sent to Broadmoor Hospital, an infamous asylum for the criminally insane. But it was too late. He was just getting started. Now, all monsters have stories, and Robert Maudsley's is as hauntingly twisted as they come. He grew up in Liverpool, surrounded by 11 brothers and sisters. There wasn't enough food or love to go around, so he spent his early years being raised by nuns in an orphanage. And those were the good times. Things turned bad when he was sent back to his parents at the age of 9. They held him captive in a locked room for months at a time. His father only opened the door to beat and sexually assault him over and over again. Eventually, he was sent to a foster home where his situation didn't improve much. After going from foster parent to foster parent, he ran away to London and fell into drugs, sex work, and murder. Unlike other serial killers, though, he found his calling after he was already behind bars. As the story goes, while being treated at Broadmoor, Robert and another inmate barricaded themselves in a hospital room with a third inmate, convicted pedophile David Francis. They tortured him for 9 hours while his screams rang out around the hospital. By the time the staff could force their way in, they were halfway through skinning him. One horrified guard swore he saw Robert eating some of the man's brains with a spoon. It probably didn't happen that way. I mean, the brain eating thing, the rest of it, yeah. But that was enough to earn him a reputation as a cannibal killer, and the other prisoners and guards kept their distance. His next stop was Wakefield Prison, aka Monster Mansion. Fun fact about Wakefield. It's been a prison since 1594, and legend has it that the prison routine and a mulberry tree in the prison yard inspired the nursery rhyme, "Here we go round the mulberry bush." You know that one. Do you know that one? It's like, "Here we go round the mulberry bush on a cold and frosty morning. This is the way we wash our face, wash our face, wash our face." Okay. Oh my God. All right. Don't judge me. Anyhow, Robert wasn't exactly a model prisoner. Less than a year after arriving at Wakefield, he struck again. According to other inmates who were there at the time, The Guardian reports that Robert tried to take out 7 more convicts, but he only got 2. But both murders happened on the same day. The first was Salney Darwood. He was at Wakefield for murdering his wife. Robert convinced him to come back to his cell with him, and then he slashed his throat with a knife that he had fashioned out of a soup spoon, and he hid his body under the bunk. He tried to lure more inmates back into his cell, but no one would fall for it because he had super crazy eyes. Eventually, he gave up the act and he just went straight to William Roberts and attacked him with his deadly spoon as the man was lying in his bunk. He wasn't exactly the innocent victim that you might be picturing. The guy was a convicted child molester doing 7 years for assaulting a little girl. And when he was dead, Robert went to the guards, handed them the shiv, and calmly told them there would be 2 less people at roll call that night. From that point on, he's been kept away from other prisoners. And for good reason. He says he will kill again if he's released, which basically sentenced him to die alone in his underground glass cage. But I don't know, a little harsh. I mean, what do you think? Does the punishment fit the crime? So next time you stream a slasher, remember, someone lived that nightmare first.
Sweet dreams, everyone, and double check those locks. We're back tomorrow with another killer story.